I want you to understand one thing from the start. At that moment, I was the happiest woman in all of Atlanta. I was standing in my kitchen, right here in my historic West End home where I've lived for more than 50 years, and the smell of my peach cobbler was mingling with the rich, warm scent of pine and frankincense. The world outside may change, but this house, my red brick beauty, still breathed the love that my late husband Samuel and I had poured into it. Every worn floorboard, every framed photograph on the mantelpiece, it was all our story. I am Mama Bessie, and I am 72 years young. I am not frail, I am not confused, and I am certainly not ready to be put out to pasture. My knees might complain a bit in the morning, but my mind is still sharper than the corner of a newly ironed sheet. And these holidays, I live for this day, to see my family gathered, to hear the joyful noise of my grandbabies echoing in these walls. This house is the anchor of my soul, my son Marcus, my only child. He's a big city lawyer now, always dressed in suits that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. He moved up to Buckhead and became somebody, as his fancy friends say. But to me, he's still the boy who used to track mud across my clean kitchen floor. When his black SUV pulled up to the curb, I felt that familiar, powerful surge of motherly pride. He emerged, dressed in that ridiculous, velvety Santa Claus costume, and hoisted his youngest, little Samuel, high up to wave at me through the window. Oh, how I wish I could rewind time to the moment before he stepped inside, because I saw his smile, too wide, too practiced, a little too much teeth, and it didn't quite reach his eyes. That was the first whisper of trouble in the quiet joy of my Christmas morning. If only I had known then the true reason he was so eager to see me leave this house, it would have broken my heart even sooner. Once everyone was settled, Marcus's wife Chloe, who always seems to look at my furniture like it's a dusty antique, and my two beautiful grandchildren, we began the sacred ritual of gift exchange. It was the perfect, warm scene I had spent weeks preparing. Presents wrapped in glittering gold and crimson paper were piled high. Chloe gave me a fancy electronic foot massager, which I'll probably give away to a sister at church, and the grandchildren brought me handmade clay ornaments. My spirit was full. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He stood up, adjusted the scratchy fake beard, and began to speak. His voice was unnecessarily loud, like a man addressing a boardroom, not his mother. "Mama," he boomed, holding out a sleek, thin white envelope. "This is more than just a gift. This is a commitment. The best thing I could do for you. I know how much work this old place is. You deserve to relax." The moment he said the word commitment, a cold dread settled deep in my bones. What kind of commitment requires such a performance on Christmas Day? I sensed a trap, and you can believe my spirit was already preparing for a battle. The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating quiet that swallowed the crackle of the fire. I took the envelope. It was feather light, almost empty, but it felt like a heavy stone in my palm. My stomach twisted. I glanced at Chloe. She was focused intently on smoothing the folds of her expensive silk skirt. She avoided my eyes completely. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a brightly colored brochure, and stapled to it, a certificate printed in an unsettling shade of gold. The Grand Oaks Retirement Community Premium Assisted Living Contract. It only took me a fraction of a second to read the main phrase, but that moment felt like a lifetime. It wiped away the smell of the cobbler, the scent of the pine, and all the warm memories of the morning. He hadn't given me rest. He had given me notice. I looked up. My son, my own flesh and blood, stood over me, glowing in that ridiculous red suit, which now felt like a mockery. He was waiting for praise. "Marcus," I said. The name was a prayer and a warning. My voice was low, steady, and dangerous. It was the voice of Mama Bessie when she sees injustice and knows she must intervene. "It's your future, Mama, the best facility in the state," he declared, gesturing widely. "Full services, meal plans, nurses on duty. You don't have to worry about this old house anymore. It's all paid for. This is your Christmas miracle." He called it a miracle, but it was the coldest betrayal I had ever witnessed. You won't believe how I managed to use a small detail about this house, a detail he had long forgotten, to bring his whole scheme crashing down. I rose slowly from the sofa. The joy of the season, the illusion of togetherness, it all shattered around me. I had been loving, I had been the perfect host, and for my reward, I received calculated cruelty wrapped up in a pretty bow. "You are trying to send me away from my home, Marcus?" I asked. My gaze was locked on his, and I watched his practiced smile finally begin to crumble under the weight of my disappointment. "We have just scraped the surface of this story, but I promise you, Mama Bessie's patience and faith are about to be tested like never before. Stay with us. You need to see where she draws her strength from when everyone turns against her. In the next part, you will discover the real dark reason Marcus needed her out of this house before the new year." The air in the living room grew thick, heavier than the velvet curtains I had just finished cleaning for the holidays. It was the kind of tension you could cut with a butter knife, yet my grandchildren, bless their innocence, were oblivious, already deep into the batteries of their new toys. I did not move. I just watched Marcus. My generation, we are masters of patience. We learned long ago that the person who talks first usually reveals too much. Marcus fidgeted with his red bow tie, then cleared his throat, performing for his audience of one. Me. "Mama, I wish you'd see this as the blessing it is," he pressed, his voice losing its forced cheer. "We're just trying to look out for you. The roof needs repairs. That foundation, it's going to cost a fortune. And honestly, the neighborhood is attracting a certain element again. You can't be here alone." He called my historic West End neighborhood a certain element. The place where he learned to ride his first bicycle, where he was baptized, where his father, Samuel, taught him how to be a man. His words sliced deeper than any knife. He wasn't seeing his home. He was seeing a decaying asset. I thought of the words of my grandmother, a woman who worked fields in South Carolina. "Bessie, if a man tries to sell you on peace, ask him what war he's starting for himself." "Marcus," I said again, slowly folding the brochure into a perfect sharp square. "This house has been paid for since 1985. It's got good bones, and those bones were built with blood, sweat, and black aspiration. You talk about repairs, but you haven't been here to inspect them in 5 years. You talk about safety, but I know all my neighbors, and we look out for one another better than any hired security firm." You know, a mother always senses when her child is lying. I could smell the fear beneath his expensive cologne. I realized then that his reasons were not about my safety. They were about a hidden clock ticking. And you will be shocked when I tell you what that clock was counting down to. I turned my attention to Chloe, who was now meticulously wiping a smudge off the corner of the fireplace mantel. "Chloe, dear," I said gently, "what exactly did you all plan to do with the house once I move into your grand oaks?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward Marcus, who shot her a warning glare, but she had been backed into a corner, and the truth, like spilled milk, cannot easily be contained. "Well, we were advised by our realtor, Greg," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the children's toys. that the market here now is unprecedented. With the new Beltline expansion and the gentrification moving rapidly, we could sell this house for nearly 3 times what it was appraised for just 5 years ago. 3 times. My sanctuary, my legacy, my safe harbor, all reduced to a lucrative number. Marcus was not gifting me security. He was using my displacement as a down payment on his own greed. Marcus jumped in quickly, his voice regaining its lawyerly authority. And we would put that money into a trust for you, Mama, a generous fund. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. My trust, I countered, my eyes burning, is right here in this house. The deed is in my safe deposit box, and it reads, Bessie Mae Jenkins Mayers, not Marcus and Chloe Mayers. You talk about trust, but you tried to push me into a box without even discussing it on Christmas Day. I saw the guilt finally surface on his face, but it was quickly replaced by resentment. He felt caught, not wrong. I refused to believe that 72 years of life lessons could be wiped out by one spoiled man. You simply cannot miss what happened next when I calmly stood up and made the one phone call Marcus truly feared. I looked at the beautiful, warm decorations, the tinsel and the twinkling lights, and felt a deep, cold ache. My son had exchanged family values for quarterly profit reports. I was his mother, but today I was simply an obstacle to be removed. I picked up the Grand Oaks certificate and tore it in half, slowly and deliberately. The sound was soft, but in that silent room it sounded like thunder. You tell your realtor, Greg, and you tell your wife, Chloe, and you tell your fancy friends in Buckhead, I said, looking straight into my son's eyes, that Bessie Mayers is not moving. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. If you want this house, you will have to take it from me in a legal battle. And trust me, Marcus, you do not want to see your mama in court. We are building to a crucial moment. What Mama Bessie does next will determine the fate of her home and her family's true legacy. You simply cannot miss how her deep, enduring wisdom triumphed over their shallow ignorance. The Christmas music was still playing softly on the record player, Nat King Cole singing about chestnuts roasting, but the melody felt like a mocking soundtrack to my despair. After I tore that certificate, Marcus grew furious, the lawyerly mask finally slipping to reveal the petulant boy beneath. You are being completely unreasonable, Mama, he snapped, raking his hand through his hair. This is the best chance you'll ever have. Do you want to die in debt, forcing us to deal with this decaying property after you're gone? I have no debt, Marcus, I stated calmly, and I will die with my dignity intact, which is more than I can say for you today. Chloe, seeing the situation spiral, grabbed the grandchildren and rushed them out of the room under the guise of starting a Christmas movie. A blessing, really. I didn't want the children to witness their father's disgrace. When the front door closed behind them, I looked at my son, not as my child, but as an opponent. He stood there, demanding ownership of something he didn't earn, simply because he was born to the person who did. That is systemic entitlement in its purest form, and I knew I had to fight the system he represented. I always taught Marcus that the best way to win a fight is to know your opponent's weakness. You wouldn't believe the flimsy financial trouble he was hiding behind his expensive suit and how easily I uncovered it. I walked slowly to the small antique writing desk in the corner. I did not rush. I did not tremble. I reached for the old black rotary phone, not the fancy cell phone Marcus bought me, and dialed a number I hadn't needed in years. "Hello, Ms. Eleanor," I said into the receiver. Ms. Eleanor Vance, 75, was my next-door neighbor, a retired probate lawyer and a founding member of the West End Historic Trust. Eleanor, darling, I hope your Christmas is blessed. Listen, I need your advice. Marcus just gave me a gift, a very expensive gift. I paused, letting the statement hang in the air, allowing Marcus, who was listening intently, to sweat. It seems he needs a very urgent clarification on the legal definition of life tenancy in the state of Georgia. And I also need to know the name of the most tenacious, hungry, young black lawyer you know who specializes in title disputes. I watched the color drain from Marcus's face. He knew what life tenancy meant, he knew who Ms. Eleanor was, and he certainly knew that I was not joking. Yes, I'll be right over. Thank you, sweetheart. May God continue to bless your wisdom. I hung up the phone. You called Eleanor Vance? Marcus sputtered, his voice cracking. Mama, she's a busy woman. This is just a simple matter of logistics. Logistics that involve my life, Marcus, and Eleanor is never too busy to fight for our neighborhood, I replied, walking past him into the kitchen. I needed to see my kitchen, the place where I bake the truth into my pies, to regain my equilibrium. I knew I had to be smart, not just angry. My mother always said, "They fear the quiet woman more than the loud one." I was about to show Marcus the quiet strength of 72 years of survival. I reached for the small, heavy deed box I kept hidden behind the cookbooks. It wasn't the one in the bank. This one held the real secrets: old policies, receipts, and letters from Samuel. I pulled out the original deed, yellowed and brittle, signed in 1973. This piece of paper was my shield. You told Chloe that the market is unprecedented, Marcus, I said, not looking up from the deed. And you are right. But if you think you can simply sell this property out from under me, you haven't done your legal homework. Or perhaps you simply forgot where you came from. The battle lines have been drawn and Mama Bessie has shown her firsthand, but the question remains, why the rush? In the next part, the true desperate financial situation that Marcus is trying to escape will be revealed. You must stay to find out what he is willing to sacrifice for his own greed. I sat at the kitchen table, the yellow deed spread out before me like a battle map. The document felt warm under my fingers, the true heat of this house, unlike the cold, empty ambition radiating from my son. Marcus was still standing by the doorway, looking out of place, defeated by the simple, enduring power of paper and principle. "You've wasted your time, Mama," he muttered, his voice edged with desperation. "The law is clear. You can fight the eviction, but I have power of attorney over your financial assets, which is what we'd be using to pay the nursing home fees. The house will still have to be liquidated to cover the cost of your care." That was the key. He thought he had planned every move. He thought my 72 years had made me slow and forgetful. "Did you now?" I asked, finally looking up at him with a slow, deliberate smile. "Tell me, Marcus, who gave you that power of attorney, and when?" "You did, Mama. Last year, when you had that dizzy spell, we discussed it. You signed the papers for financial management and healthcare decisions. You said you wanted everything easy." He had used my momentary weakness, a single dizzy spell, as an opening to strip me of my autonomy. That stung more than the eviction notice. I knew then that my son had not come to me for the holidays. He had come to finalize a hostile takeover. You would be shocked to know how many people he had already betrayed to get to this point, including his own law partners. I pushed the deed aside and picked up the black, cracked photo frame holding a picture of Samuel, my late husband, smiling wide under his navy hat. Your father, bless his soul, was a man who planned for the long haul. He taught me to have an exit strategy for every door. I walked to the pantry and reached far back, behind the bags of dried beans and the jar of pickled okra. I pulled out a plain tin box, a relic from the 1960s. You see this, Marcus? This is what's called true financial management. I opened the box. Inside, stacked neatly, were municipal bond certificates, 2 life insurance policies, one from my time as a school secretary, the other from Samuel's post office job, and a small, almost forgotten document labeled Revocation of Power of Attorney, effective 12/25 to 2024. I had signed it 6 months ago after talking to Ms. Eleanor, the probate lawyer next door. I had a strong feeling then that Marcus's sudden interest in my finances was too strong to be pure love. I may have signed that power of attorney last year, Marcus, but I revoked it 6 months later, well within my legal rights. I had the document notarized by Mr. Henderson down at the credit union, and a copy was sent to your law office, I explained, my voice steady and victorious. You must have been too busy to read your mail. Marcus stared at the document in my hand, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning panic. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He had lost his grip. This was the moment when I finally understood the why. A mother's intuition told me this was not about my money, it was about his lack of it. I was about to ask him the one question that would shatter his facade completely. So, now that my finances are my own and I have no need for your expensive, paid-for nursing home, let's talk about your urgent need to sell my house, I pressed. I lowered my voice, suddenly compassionate, which made him flinch more than my anger ever could. Marcus, I know your firm had a rough year, and I know you just put down a large deposit on a lake house in Buckhead you can't truly afford. How do you know that? He stammered, his body slumped against the kitchen counter. A mother knows, son, and your mother keeps good track of the property transactions in Atlanta. You're over-leveraged. You need a fast cash injection before the end of the year, or your entire life comes tumbling down. Isn't that right, Marcus? You weren't trying to save me. You were trying to save yourself by stealing my home. Marcus was trapped. The air of superiority, the expensive perfume of success had vanished, replaced by the sour scent of fear. He looked around my kitchen, no longer seeing a place to dine on Christmas Day, but a commodity, a life raft slipping just out of reach. Mama, you don't understand the severity of this, he pleaded, dropping the lawyerly pretense entirely. I need that equity. If I don't close on the Buckhead property by the 30th, I lose the entire deposit. 6 figures, Mama, and the bank will call in other notes. This isn't about greed anymore. It's about ruin. You have a moral obligation to help your son. A moral obligation. He used the word like a club. My moral obligation, I countered, my voice regaining its quiet power, was fulfilled the day I birthed you and raised you to be a decent man. My obligation did not extend to financing your mistakes and your vanity projects. This house is your father's legacy, Marcus, and a legacy is not a loan. I looked at him, realizing that his desperation was my greatest strength. My mother always told me, when they get loud, you get quiet and check your papers. I was about to check the last, most powerful paper. I tapped the brittle, yellow deed. You talk about your financial needs, but you never bothered to learn about the history of this house. You only saw the market value. You never saw the true value. I walked over to the built-in bookshelf, not for a cookbook, but for a worn, leather-bound volume, The History of the West End Community. I opened it to a marked page. When your daddy and I bought this house in 1973, there was a lot of talk about urban renewal and blight. We knew they were trying to push us out, even then, so we did something strategic, something to protect our children's future. I held up the book, pointing to a small, dense paragraph. In 1980, your father and I, along with Miss Eleanor and 5 other families on this block, voluntarily placed our properties under a historic preservation covenant with the city of Atlanta through the West End Historic Trust. This wasn't about tax breaks, son. This was about protection. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes scanning the paragraph, his legal mind struggling to catch up. What does that mean, Mama? He demanded, the panic now fully evident. It means 2 things, Marcus. First, that the exterior and the structural integrity of this house cannot be significantly altered or demolished without a lengthy review and approval from the trust, which I happen to co-chair. Second, and this is the important part for your realtor, the covenant restricts the sale and subsequent use of the property to residential, community-focused purposes only, and prohibits any quick flipping for pure profit in a defined period. I watched the realization hit him. The house was not merely a desirable piece of property, it was a protected, politically entangled community asset. His entire plan, the quick sale, the high price, the immediate cash injection, was rendered impossible by a decision his parents made 44 years ago to protect their home from people exactly like him. The trust would block any rapid sale to an outside developer, Marcus. The paperwork is ironclad. And as the last living person listed on the covenant, you are legally powerless to move me or sell the house quickly without a decade of legal headaches. The market may be unprecedented, but my protection is permanent. He stumbled backward, knocking over a kitchen chair, all the power drained from his body, leaving behind a ruined man in a cheap Santa costume. This was the ultimate triumph of foresight over short-sighted greed. Mama Bessie was not just protecting her roof, she was protecting her history. You absolutely have to see the final quiet scene of their confrontation when Marcus finally realizes the weight of what he has lost. I walked over to him, picking up the chair he had carelessly tossed aside. You came here today to kick me out, dressed as a benevolent figure to finance your own recklessness. You failed, son. Now, you can leave. And when you come back, you will come back as my son, not as my vulture. The front door slammed with a violence that shook the glass panes of the old window. Marcus was gone. He didn't say goodbye, didn't wish me Merry Christmas, and didn't even acknowledge his children as he stormed past them to his waiting SUV. He had arrived as Santa Claus and left as a desperate, ruined man. I stood in the silence of the living room, the scent of pine still strong, but the air was now cold with the residue of conflict. I looked at the little pile of torn paper, the certificate for Grand Oaks, and felt a profound weariness. I had won the battle, yes, but at the cost of a deeper wound to my own heart. You can defend your home, but defending the soul of your son is a harder task. My immediate family had crumbled, but my true strength was waiting outside. I walked to the pantry again, not for the deed box this time, but for my coat and hat. I had to see Ms. Eleanor, not just for legal advice, but for the soul-nourishing truth that comes from the sisterhood of our generation. I knew I couldn't just stop Marcus's plan. I had to force him to face his consequences and then find a way to redeem himself. I was about to ask Ms. Eleanor for a favor that would put Marcus's entire legal career in jeopardy, but it was the only way to save my legacy. When I reached Ms. Eleanor's house next door, the warmth was immediate. She poured me a cup of hot cider and listened patiently to my story, nodding slowly as I recounted Marcus's betrayal and my defense using the historic preservation covenant. "Bessie, you are a marvel," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. Samuel always taught you well. That covenant is like a fortress. Marcus can't touch the house. But he is ruined, Eleanor, I said, the compassion returning despite myself. He loses his deposit, and he loses everything he's built on that foolish vanity. He will crash. And I don't want his crash to take down my grandchildren's future, even if he doesn't deserve my pity. Miss Eleanor, the wise old lawyer, leaned closer. My dear, the best way to teach a lesson is to let the consequence be the teacher. But you don't have to watch him crash alone. We, the community, can intervene. We realized that the same legal system he tried to use to evict me could be used to hold him accountable, not just financially, but morally. You simply won't believe the legal action we planned next, which involved the City Trust and the biggest investors in Atlanta. I presented my idea. Eleanor, do you remember that small piece of land bordering my backyard in the community park? The one that was never properly deeded when the trust was formed? She frowned in concentration. Yes, the small wedge. It's technically unused city property, but your fence has been around it for decades. Exactly, I said, a plan clicking into place. Marcus tried to sell the house as a single unit, including that unused space. If the trust officially claims that land now, before the end of the year, it shrinks my property line. But it also makes the whole lot legally smaller and even less appealing for a high-profit developer. It secures the house forever. Even if Marcus tries to challenge the covenant. Ms. Eleanor's eyes widened. Bessie? That's brilliant. It's a double lock. It solidifies the trust's claim and blocks any future loophole he might find. But why do it now? Because, I finished, a decisive tone entering my voice. I need to show Marcus that the true, unshakable equity isn't in money, it's in community. And I am about to use my community to save his skin, but only on my terms. The warmth of Ms. Eleanor's agreement and the solid legal plan gave me a temporary shield, but I knew Marcus wouldn't concede defeat quietly. A lawyer cornered is a dangerous thing, especially one whose reputation is about to be ruined by a failed real estate gamble. I was back in my house preparing a small pot of gumbo to take to a sick neighbor when the phone rang. It was Deaconess Gloria from the Greater Zion AME Church. Her voice was thin, laced with a familiar ecclesiastical worry. Bessie, dear, I just got a call from Pastor James. I'm not sure how to say this, but is it true that your son Marcus is preparing to sue the church? My hand froze over the stove. The ladle clattered into the pot. Sue the church? Gloria, what are you talking about? It's about that new youth wing construction project. He claims that the church board owes him a substantial, outstanding legal fee from 3 years ago when he helped them with the zoning permits. He says if it's not paid by New Year's, he's filing a lien against the property and halting construction. My blood ran cold. The youth wing was my passion project. I had chaired the fundraising committee for 5 years and the community was counting on it. Marcus knew that. This wasn't about money. It was about pure, spiteful retaliation. He couldn't hurt my house, so he attacked my sanctuary. I realized then that Marcus wasn't just desperate. He was willing to burn down the entire community structure that raised him to save his own skin. You simply won't believe the flimsy decade-old paperwork he used to try and ruin me. Gloria, I assure you, Marcus was paid in full 3 years ago for that work. He even volunteered a discount. This is a fabrication, a lie to hurt me, I insisted, gripping the phone tighter. I believe you, Bessie, but Pastor James is terrified. The church funds are tied up in the construction budget. If Marcus files that lien, the bank pulls the loan and we lose the building permits. And the congregation, they will ask why your son is attacking us. The shame hit me like a physical blow. The church community where I had served faithfully, where I had found solace after Samuel's death, would question my loyalty, my son's morality, and implicitly, my judgment as a mother. Marcus was using my own reputation as a weapon against me. I hung up, my hands trembling. This was a direct, personal assault on my dignity and my standing in the West End. I paced the length of my kitchen, my mind racing. I couldn't fight him with just the deed anymore. I needed to hit him where he lived, in his legal, professional world. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. If they try to bury you, remember you are a seed. I was about to germinate a plan that would expose Marcus's true character, not just to me, but to the entire city of Atlanta. I immediately called Miss Eleanor again. I explained the situation with the church, my voice sharp with controlled fury. Eleanor, I said, a clear, decisive plan forming in my mind. Marcus is desperate and dangerous. We need to move the clock faster. We need to publicly expose his unethical behavior before he files that lien on the church. How, Bessie? We can't just accuse him. We use the covenant, I stated firmly. That historic preservation covenant is a matter of public record. We will not only file the claim for the park land boundary, but we will call an urgent meeting of the West End Historic Trust tonight. I want the minutes from that meeting confirming my revocation of his power of attorney and the ironclad protections on this house to be leaked to the local Black community newspaper and the city council's office by tomorrow morning. When Marcus goes to his firm tomorrow to salvage his reputation, he will discover that his mother not only ruined his real estate deal, but that she has officially declared him an unreliable, legally impotent actor in the community he claims to serve. He cannot sue the church if his own ethics are under public review. I spent the rest of Christmas Day and the following morning working the phone like a political strategist. My kitchen table was covered not with leftovers, but with legal documents, contact lists, and notes on the specific bylaws of the West End Historic Trust. Ms. Eleanor was my steadfast ally. Making calls to the city council contacts she still kept warm. By early afternoon on December 26th, the pieces were in place. We didn't wait for Marcus to make his move. We struck first. The small but influential Atlanta Voice newspaper's digital edition ran a top story with a devastating headline, West End Matriarch Blocks Son Scheme. Historic Covenant Protects Community from Gentrification Vulture. The article didn't mention the church lawsuit directly, but it exposed everything else. The attempted forced eviction of the mother from her longtime debt-free home, the hurried revocation of the power of attorney, complete with a copy of Mr. Henderson's notarization, and the legal move to dedicate the small strip of land to the city park, securing the property's community future forever. It painted Marcus not as a sharp lawyer, but as a callous, unethical opportunist preying on his own blood and neighborhood heritage. The moment that article hit the public eye, Marcus's expensive career began to crumble faster than a cheap gingerbread house. You would not believe the immediate backlash from his powerful church-going clients who read the Atlanta Voice every morning. I received a call from Pastor James, his voice trembling not with fear now but with gratitude. Bessie, the elders are calling an emergency meeting. They've seen the paper. They know now this isn't about the church's debt. It's about your son's shame. But the real reaction came 30 minutes later. My personal, seldom used cell phone began to vibrate violently. The display showed the number of Marcus's managing partner, Mr. Henderson, the senior, very formidable Mr. Henderson, whose family had deep roots in the AME community. I ignored it. I knew the call was coming from Marcus himself, using his partner's line. I had to let him sweat. I finished my cup of tea, then picked up the phone. "Mama!" Marcus's voice was frantic, unrecognizable, stripped of all its polished cadence. "You've ruined me. The bank just called my law firm. Mr. Henderson is demanding I liquidate assets immediately. They've seen the article. They know about the covenant. My career is over, Mama." "Your career was over the minute you tried to sell your own mother's dignity for a profit, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "You attacked the church, son. You attacked the foundation of our community. That is unforgivable." I knew this was the ultimate test. His ruin was assured, but I needed him to choose redemption over spite. I was about to give him a terrible choice, one that only a desperate man would consider. "I can fix the lien on the church, Mama. I can drop the lawsuit. Just tell them you fabricated the story. Say you misunderstood the power of attorney. Help me save the lake house deposit," he begged. "No," I said simply. "I will not lie for you, but I will give you a chance to save your soul and your professional integrity, which is worth more than any deposit. You have one option to redeem yourself in this community." I waited. The silence on the phone line was heavy, filled only with Marcus's ragged breathing. He had heard the truth. His expensive life was collapsing, and his mother, the woman he tried to sideline, was the architect of his professional exposure. "What do I have to do, Mama?" he finally choked out. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, childlike compliance. "You have to save the church, Marcus, not just by dropping your phony lien, but by making it right," I stated, my voice firm. "You will go down to the Greater Zion AME Church office right now. You will meet with Pastor James and the entire church board." I knew that public humiliation was the only currency that mattered to him, so I insisted on a public act of humility. You absolutely must stay to hear the exact words he had to use to make amends. "When you get there," I continued, laying out my terms like stones on a path, "you will not only formally withdraw your claim and apologize for the distress you caused, but you will also publicly announce that you will personally donate, as a tithe from your firm, the full amount needed to complete the youth wing construction in honor of your father, Samuel Mayers." Marcus gasped. "Mama, that's over 150,000. I don't have that kind of liquid cash right now." "You will find it," I said without blinking. "That is less than what you would have lost on your lake house deposit, and far less than the legal fees you'll owe for trying to sue your own church. It is the cost of your soul, Marcus. And if you do this, if you humble yourself before God and your community, I will consider not sharing the full details of your predatory real estate practices with the State Bar Ethics Committee." I gave him the terrible, stark choice: ruin his career entirely, or sacrifice his ill-gotten gains for redemption and the community's future. He hung up without another word. I didn't know if he would choose greed or grace, but I knew I had done all I could. I sat back down in my favorite armchair, the exhaustion finally settling in. I had fought a fierce battle, not with an enemy, but with the peace of my own heart. About an hour later, the phone rang again. It wasn't Marcus, it was Pastor James. "Bessie? Sister Bessie," the pastor's voice was full of emotion. "He is here. He came in, not in his fancy suit, but looking like a boy who had been caught stealing cookies. He confessed the whole thing, with tears in his eyes. He signed the withdrawal papers and he wrote a personal check, a very large check to the church. dated for the 30th of December. Pastor James paused, his voice catching. He said it was to honor you, Mama Bessie, for teaching him the true meaning of legacy. He said it was the least he could do to pay his debt to the community that raised him. A wave of relief, so strong it felt like vertigo, washed over me. Marcus had chosen the path of righteousness. He had lost his money, but he had begun the painful process of reclaiming his soul. The battle was won. My house was safe, the church was funded, and my son, though humbled, was on the path to becoming the man his father wanted him to be. You simply cannot miss the final, tender lesson I give him in the epilogue about what truly matters in life. The day after the confrontation, the house felt different. The tension had lifted, replaced by a quiet, reflective peace. The children were gone, taken by Chloe to visit her family, giving me the space I needed. The air smelled of burnt ambition and newly baked hope. I was sitting in the parlor looking out at the snow-dusted dogwood tree when I heard the subtle creak of the front door. It wasn't the frantic slam of the day before. It was a hesitant, gentle push. Marcus stood there, stripped of his expensive coat, his tie loosened, looking exhausted but clean. He wasn't wearing a Santa suit or a lawyer's mask. He was just my son. "Mama," he whispered, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't step further than the threshold. "Come in, son," I said, my voice soft. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had done its work. Now it was time for healing. "The fight is over. You don't need permission to enter your mother's home." He walked in slowly, closing the door behind him. He looked around the room, at the mantelpiece with Samuel's picture, at the worn spot on the carpet where he used to build his train tracks, at the Christmas tree still twinkling. This time, he wasn't calculating its market value. He was seeing its soul. I knew that the most important lesson wasn't about the money he lost, but about the inheritance he almost threw away. You simply can't miss the simple object I used to finally reach his heart. He stopped right in front of the tea cart and just looked at me. "I lost the lake house deposit, Mama," he confessed, his voice heavy with defeat. "And the firm put me on indefinite leave. Mr. Henderson said I need to do some serious soul-searching before I can practice law there again." "I know, son," I replied, nodding gently. "Ruin is a bitter teacher, but its lessons are the most lasting." He finally looked me in the eye. "I was blind, Mama. I saw this house, this neighborhood as something to be escaped, not cherished. I was so focused on having a bigger life that I almost sacrificed the only real life I had. I put a price tag on your dignity and your memory of Daddy. I am so sorry." He didn't just apologize for the action, he apologized for the intention. That was the moment I knew my son was coming back. "I forgive you, Marcus," I said, the words coming easily and truly. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You have to earn your way back into the trust of this community, starting with the church." This was the moment of quiet resolution. He had given up his wealth, and I was giving him back his purpose. I told him the one thing his father always wanted for him, not wealth, but rootedness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver key, the key to the small, unused shed in the backyard that sat on the newly designated parkland. "You remember that shed? Your daddy and I used it to store his old carpentry tools. Now that that little piece of land belongs to the West End Historic Trust, they need a small office for the community garden project. I told them you would volunteer to fix it up, not with hired help, but with your own two hands. You need to reconnect with the things you can't buy, Marcus." He took the key. It was a physical sign of his new commitment. He wasn't building a lake house. He was restoring a community asset. A few weeks later, my grandchildren returned for a visit, and they were the first to see the change in their father. Marcus, still on leave from his firm, was in the backyard wearing old jeans and covered in sawdust, genuinely smiling as he worked on the community shed. That evening, as the family gathered again around the parlor, the atmosphere was genuinely joyful. Marcus wasn't boasting about cases, he was talking about lumber and planning benches for the park. Before they left, I pulled Marcus aside. "Son," I said, placing my hand on his cheek, "your father used to say that a man is only as rich as his roots are deep. You almost severed your own roots for fool's gold." I looked around the parlor. "This house," I murmured, "it's protected by a legal covenant and a physical deed. But you, Marcus, you are protected by something stronger, the love of your community and your faith. Don't forget that this community saved you when your own ambition tried to ruin you." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes again. "I won't, Mama. Never again." He hugged me tight. A real hug, not the Santa performance. I felt the profound triumph of a mother who had not only protected her home but had, through fierce love and strategic wisdom, pulled her son back from the brink of moral disaster. My heart was full. My home was safe. My legacy was intact, and the Christmas miracle wasn't a gift I received, but the lesson my son learned.